Yep, hey, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. I am just starting here. I just retweeted this out onto my Twitter, but we are beginning a 14-week study of Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. This is the book that I co-authored with my good friend Suchan Ra, and it was published in 2019, November 5th, actually, almost a year and a half ago. And I've been very pleased with this book. It was a challenge, but also a thrill to write. And I wanted to do something officially to kind of help bring people through it. I've done several Q&As. I've obviously been following on social media. I've been promoting it. We're selling signed copies of the book on my website, wirelesshogan.com, where people can purchase that. But I've wanted to really take some time to go deeper into the book. And so I've been playing with an idea of trying to promote it more and answer people's questions and kind of go more methodically through the book. And I decided that this week I'm just going to start a 14-week study. There's 12 chapters in the book, and then there's an introduction and a conclusion. So we're going to take 1 week for each of those. I'll read excerpts from the book. So I won't read entire chapters, but I'll read a few excerpts from the chapters we're going through each week. I'll talk and elaborate on things going on in the chapter, that section, and then I will also do some Q&A. And so I want to welcome everybody to the study. I will probably talk between half hour to 45 minutes in each study, and then in future weeks we'll take more intentional time for Q&A. But I just want to really give you a better feel for this book and for what our goals are for the book. I'm really hoping that we can get some good dialogue generated about this book and get some things moving forward with it. So let me begin, as I always do, which is by acknowledging the nation whose land I'm on. I moved with my family from the Navajo Nation to Washington, D.C. about 5.5 years ago. And these lands where we are now living are the land of the Piscataway. The Haudenosaunee also has some lands in this area as well. But for my research, the Piscataway were most specifically on the lands around D.C. And so I want to honor the Piscataway. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. I want to acknowledge how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. And I want to recognize the Piscataway are still here. I've actually attended some ceremonies where we've been welcomed to the lands by the Piscataway. I've spoken to members of the Piscataway Nation and have told them I'm living here and had dialogue with them about it. And so it's a very meaningful thing to build a relationship with the people indigenous to the land where you're living. And it was just before the pandemic started that I was able to make introduction with some of the Piscataway. And then everything with their nation has been closed down, so I haven't had a chance to go back to some of their offices. But I'm looking forward to resuming that once things get going again. Just regarding land recognition, one of the things that is very important, you notice if you listen to me speak every day when I'm online, that I recognize the nation whose land I'm on. That's something I began doing several years ago, and it's something I want to see not only other people do, but even our leaders and our churches and institutions and organizations begin to do. And not just to symbolically say whose land you're on, but to actually have it come out of meaningful relationship and to have significance. I've shared this site many times before, and let me share it one more time. It's the site that I use most frequently to look up the people whose land that I'm living on. And I'll share that again for you right now. It's native-land.ca. And it's a very good resource. It's not the ultimate authority, but it's a very good resource to look up your address, look up the city, the state, the area where you're living, and you can learn some of the history of that land, the treaties signed there, the languages spoken there, and the people indigenous to those lands. It's a good place to begin your research. Again, it's not the end all, but it's a great place to begin your research and to begin the journey of knowing the people whose land you're living on or you're traveling to even. And this is actually something we do this in the book as well, where at the end of the book, we have a list, and it's not an official list. It's an unofficial list that we were able to compile from several different sources, but we wanted to include as many Native nations as we possibly could. And so at the end of the book, beginning on page 212, we have several pages of as many Native nations that we could find that are indigenous to these lands. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. There may be some replication, and there will always be the debate about recognition and which one is legitimate. And we attempted to err on the side of being more inclusive rather than less. I've heard from a few people where this has caused some dismay. It's not that I want to be inaccurate or even be disrespectful, but I wanted to be as inclusive as possible. And so we have federally recognized tribes, we have state recognized tribes. I think we even have some unrecognized tribes on the list there. It's not the final list. That list is always, I think, being refined and regenerated as things are learned and identities are discussed and decisions are made. But we wanted to have an inclusive list, and so that's at the back of our book. And it's something I'm actually very proud that it's there. I'm very grateful that it's there, that we were able to try and recognize as many of the Native nations as we could who are indigenous to these lands we now call the United States of America. A few other just things about the book. It was published in December of 2019, November of 2019, November 5th. And it has won 3 awards that I'll just discuss these brief. Well, 2 awards and 1 recognition, but it was given a Publishers Weekly starred review, which I remember the first day that I was told we had a starred review. I went to Publishers Weekly site. I had never been there. I didn't know what a starred review was, and I noticed there was 1 star by the name, and I'm like, I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. I wasn't aware that a starred review from Publishers Weekly is actually quite rare, and it was our publisher who told me that this is actually a very good thing to have your book receive not only a review by Publishers Weekly, but a starred review. Apparently, there's a lot of bookstores and libraries that on an annual basis will just go and order all of the starred reviews from Publishers Weekly. And so it's a great lead-in to get your book into some smaller independent bookstores, as well as public libraries and other places around the country, not just the big sellers, the Barnes & Nobles and Amazons and other large bookstores, but a lot of the smaller, more independent bookstores. And so we received a star review from Publishers Weekly, which was a great way for our book to kind of be introduced, I thought. I was very grateful for that. We also received in 2019 the American Society of Missiology Book Award. This is for excellence in missiology. And I'm very grateful for that. The book was published by a Christian publisher. I was raised in the church. I was the pastor of a church in Denver, Colorado for many years called the Christian Indian Center. My co-author is a professor of theology at North Park Seminary, actually transferring now to Fuller Theological Seminary in Southern California. And so obviously our book is rooted in and comes out some of the Christian faith. But it's a very strong critique of the church's history of missions. Actually, I would say it's a rebuke of the church's history with missions. And so for our book to receive an award for excellence in missiology, just because it's such a critique of the church and even a rebuke of the church, and yet it still receives this award, I was very grateful for that. And so I'm happy to see that, and I was glad for that. The other award that we received, this was in 2020, was the ECPA Top Shelf Book Cover Award. And we received an award for the cover of our book. If you have ordered it, you'll notice it's a very unique design where it has ships kind of sailing in what looks to be very rough waters, and then you can see kind of a rug weave throughout that are some of the waves interspersed throughout the design. And the first design that they showed me of the cover was very similar to the one that's actually on the cover. But when I asked the publisher who the weaver of the rug was, they didn't know. They had found an image of a rug online somewhere that they had access to, and they downloaded it and then were able to use it in the design of the book cover. But I felt very strongly that because I'm Navajo, because the book is about our nation's genocidal history against Native American peoples and writing us out of the history of this country, I wanted to make sure that we were acknowledging and recognizing people at every step of the way. And if someone's rug was included in our cover, I wanted to know their name, and I wanted to be able to recognize them and honor them. And so I asked them to go out and either find the weaver whose rug they had used, or to find another weaver, another rug where they knew the name of the weaver, and we would include that one in the cover. And I was very grateful. That's what our publisher did. That's what University Press did. And so the weaver that wove our rug is Catherine Marianito. And I'm going to actually share a link for her in the chat. She is a well-known weaver, and she's also a boarding school survivor. And she weaves to part of her healing is she weaves. And I've had the chance. She actually lives not too far from my parents back in New Mexico. She lives on the Navajo Nation. My parents live in the checkerboard area, not actually on the Navajo Nation, but in the checkerboard area of our reservation. And I was home visiting my parents. This was actually about a year ago now, a little over a year ago. And I was able to meet Catherine in person. Her and her husband came and met me at a place just off of the reservation, and I was able to shake her hand and talk with her and thank her for her rug. And so if you look in the cover of our book, on the front page with all the acknowledgments and everything else on the same page as the contents, you will notice that we have Catherine listed as the weaver of the rug. That's included. And so the fact that our book received an award for the cover of the book, that's not just an award for the designers of the cover, but I believe this is also an award for Catherine. I'm looking forward to, after the pandemic is over, going back to the Navajo Nation and actually being able to meet with her in person again and recognize her, do something to honor her as the weaver of the rug that was on the cover of her book that won this award. And so I'm very grateful for that. So our book begins on Selling Truth, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. As I said earlier, it's a 12-chapter book, and it has an introduction as well as a conclusion, so 14 sections, and we're going to be going over one of them per week for the next several, probably the next 3.5 months. We'll be doing this. And we started the book. If you read the introduction of the book, which is what I'm going to be covering today, the introduction of the book begins the exact same way I begin every public speaking event that I have, which begins with me introducing myself in Navajo. Again, that was very intentional why we did that. We did that because on the Navajo Nation, as I always say, we're identified by our 4 clans. That's who we are. And our primary identity comes from our mother's mother. And so whenever you speak publicly, whenever you're at an event on the Navajo Nation, whenever you introduce yourself, you always give your 4 clans. It's our clan system is how we know how we're related to one another. And so when we give our 4 clans, people know how to relate to us. And they know how they're related to us and what that relationship means and how we're supposed to interact. Are we brothers? Is there a parent-child? How are we related clan-wise? And so we start the book that way, with me introducing myself with my 4 clans. So my mother's mother is American and Dutch heritage, which is Simbake Dene, the wooden shoe people. My father's mother is Torhiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My mother's father is also Simbake Dene, and my father's father is Torhiglini, which is the Bitterwater clan. We also then have Sungchan introduce himself, and he talks about his family and his experiences growing up. And then I come back in the introduction, and I'm actually going to read part of this section. I think I've read this before. It's actually adapted from a blog I wrote years ago when we were living back on the Navajo Nation. But I want to read it for you now because it's so important. Actually, before I do that, there's another section of the introduction where we talk about my relationship with Sungchan. And there's a section of that I wanted to read for you because it's the 3rd paragraph of that section. And it says, this book is primarily the story of Mark, his people, and their relationship to the church and the nation. Mark's voice will be front and center in the narrative and will provide the melody, while Sungchan's role will be to provide the harmony to complement the main narrative. We hope that this book will serve as a unique chorus of both our experiences and voices. May it be an expression of the truth we have learned and the power of common memory. When we wrote this book, and before I ran for president, Sungchan was already an established author and was fairly well known, especially within Christian and evangelical circles. He had written several books, including The Next Evangelicalism, and he had published another book just prior to this book called A Prophetic Lament. And so he knew the book writing industry well. He was a fairly well-known author. And I was very honored that he was interested and willing to co-author this book with me. And then for him to also be able to say that it was going to be my voice that was going to take front and center as a less experienced, less known author at that time. It was very meaningful for me. And what's so important about that is throughout my journey of bringing this book out and getting this content out, there have been many people, much like Sungchan, who have stepped back from their platform or handed me their platform to allow me to talk about these things around the doctrine of discovery. Sungchan did that very clearly with this book by allowing my voice and my narrative to be the center theme of this book. There's another friend of mine, his name is Brian Mclaren, who did something very similar for me along the way. And I just want to honor him too with this story because he's a well-known author and has written a lot of books. And I published an article. It was my first real published article about the doctrine of discovery that kind of it didn't go viral, but it got shared a lot, it got read a lot. And it kind of got me on a lot of people's radar. And Brian read that article and began to share it. And we connected online a little bit. I didn't know who he was. I had never heard of him before. But at one point we were talking on the phone, and I was traveling a lot to talk about the doctrine of discovery, and he was traveling a lot because he's a speaker and a writer as well and travels all over the globe. And we were talking about a desire to get to meet if our paths ever crossed. And we started naming what our travel schedules were like and if we were going to cross paths anywhere. And we didn't have any kind of shared conferences we were at, our speaking engagements we would be at, or even paths crossing. But he said to me, he said, there's a conference I'm speaking at in Phoenix. He said, it's not my conference. And so I can't technically invite you to speak or pay you to speak. But I've been asked to speak there, and I'm doing it as a favor for a friend, or he's going to speak at this conference. He said, but if you can get there, I will give you my speaking slot. You can have my slot. And I was very grateful. So it turned out I was coming off of a trip and I could fly down to Phoenix and meet him at this conference. And so I flew down. We met. We shared a hotel. He let me stay in the hotel he was staying at, his room with him. And we met for the first time. And again, I didn't know him. I didn't know what type of a platform he had. And he was scheduled to speak the second day. And so the first day at the conference, I was there with him and other organizers of the conference. And it soon dawned on me that I learned very quickly that he was one of the primary speakers of the conference. And most people attending the conference were there to hear his voice, to hear his message. And this really kind of threw me. And the next day, when it was his turn to speak, he went up on stage and he took the mic and he said, sometimes it's important for the white male to step aside and to give voices, to give platform to voices we don't hear from as often. And he said, I want to introduce you to Monk Charles. And I went up on stage and I gave a 20-minute, 25-minute presentation on the Doctrine of Discovery. And it took the house down. I mean, it was really, really, really well received. But it was those types of experiences, things like what Brian did, things like what Simchan did, where they literally gave me some of their platform to allow me to bring these truths forward. That was incredibly humbling. Simchan did that in how we wrote this book. Brian did that. Other people have done that throughout my life in allowing me to bring these truths front and center. And so I have to point that out. That's a very important part of this book. And so we talk about, how our voices are going to be heard in this book, in that chapter. And then now I want to read this section. It's a little bit longer section, but it's about the spirituality of the sunrise. And I want to read this section of the book. I, Mark, remember hearing a Navajo preacher exhort a congregation on our reservation by asking us, how come before the missionaries came, our people were able to wake up every morning to greet the sunrise with our prayers, and now we can hardly get to church by 10 a.m.? One of the most beautiful, beneficial, and sacred spiritual disciplines I have incorporated into my life is the discipline of watching the sunrise. It is one thing to watch the sunrise a couple times a year, perhaps on Easter for a sunrise service or when you have a 6 a.m. flight. Both times are beautiful and calming. If the clouds are just right, the sunrise can be breathtaking. But it is another thing altogether to intentionally rise at 5 or 6 mornings a week and be in a posture of prayer while watching the sunrise come up over the horizon. When you do this, you notice something very different. Yes, it is beautiful, peaceful, and often breathtaking. But when you do it day after day, week after week, month after month, and eventually year after year, something else happens. Subtle changes become glaring. Every morning in the spring, the sun moves just a little further north. Every morning in the fall, the sun inches a little further south. The birds come and go, migrating in the general direction of the sun's path. It is quiet. In the spring, the sun rises just a minute or two earlier, and as the days go longer, and the earth warms as it begins to wake up. And in the fall, the sunrise happens a minute or two later as the earth cools and prepares to go to sleep. Even the days of the calendar take on a different meaning. June 21st is the first day of summer, and most of the hemisphere is celebrating. The days are long, the weather is warm, schools are out, pools are open, barbecue grills are cleaned, and vacations are planned. But the 21st day also marks an ending, and you can't help but feel a slight mourning, a hint of lament, and a tinge of sadness, because you don't just know, you actually see. The sun has completed its journey north, and tomorrow, June 22nd, it will rise just a moment or two later as it begins a long journey south. The same is true on the 21st day of December, the first day of winter. Many people are feeling glum. Winter is starting. The days are short. The weather is chilly. Almost no one celebrates the first day of winter as it marks the start of a long, cold, and dark season. But on that morning, you can't help but feel excited and find a new spring in your step. The sun has completed its long journey south. The days are through getting shorter, and a new journey is beginning. You are hopeful because you know, you see, and you experience the very next day will be nearly a minute longer as the sun once again begins its slow and hopeful journey north. Another benefit of watching the sunrise is the beauty of the sky. After a while, you realize it's not so much a sky as it is a canvas. Creator is not far off and distant. Creator is an amazing artist with a personality, an eye for beauty, and even a sense of humor. Every morning is a carefully orchestrated production, complete with a musical score. But the production is not a play or even a musical. The production is the act of creating a piece of art. The production is the privilege of watching the artist painting the picture, shaping the vase, and arranging the score. So the beauty is not just the final product. The beauty is seen in watching the piece of artwork come into being. All of creation is both a grateful participant and a privileged observer, not a single morning, but throughout the fullness of the seasons. Birds sing, flowers bloom, winds blow, leaves turn different colors, clouds pass, animals stop, and donkeys bray. Yes, it is true, even the obnoxious bray of a donkey can add a praiseworthy note to the production. While living on the reservation, my daughter would frequently wake up and join me as I walked to the top of the hill near our house to watch the sunrise. As we walked up the hill, we could hear in the background birds singing, dogs barking, and the occasional car passing by, but the most distinct yet infrequent noise we heard was that of a donkey braying. We didn't hear it every day or even every week. It was sporadic and unpredictable, yet surprisingly consistent. Every morning we would listen for it, and each time we heard it, my daughter exclaimed, "Daddy, I hear my favorite donkey." If you've ever heard the sound of a donkey bray, you know that it can be an extremely loud and quickly becomes annoying. It usually goes on for several seconds and sounds about as pleasant as an untrained performer with laryngitis attempting to sing opera. Yet, as my daughter and I watched the sunrise, we would pray, and whenever we heard her prayer included the phrase, "And Jesus, I thank you that I heard my favorite donkey." My daughter knew this donkey. She listened to for his bray and became filled with joy every time she heard it. Only a masterful artist with impeccable timing, a perfect knowledge of the breadth of the tools available, and a bit of a wacky sense of humor could ever pull off incorporating the annoying sound of a donkey's bray into something as breathtakingly beautiful as a sunrise and still elicit both joy and praise from the audience. But the biggest benefit of this discipline of watching the sunrise did not come from enjoying the beauty or even from experiencing the season, but from an understanding much deeper in my soul. This understanding did not occur after one sunrise or even after 30. It began happening after months, years of watching the seasons pass, of observing the birds migrate, of feeling the temperatures rise and then fall, and it began happening after experiencing over and over the long journey of the sun, first north and then back again to the south. The longer I was privileged to see the masterful and artistic genius of Creator, and the longer I was blessed to stand in the midst of the grandeur of this masterpiece, the easier it became to acknowledge that neither I nor all of humankind, for that matter, was in control. Ultimately, this production is not ours. We cannot make the sun rise faster. We are unable to change the orders of the seasons. The birds sing, the flowers bloom, the grass grows, the seasons change, not because of us or even in spite of us, but because of Creator. This work of art, this amazing, ongoing, beautifully choreographed production is our blessing to observe. It is our privilege to participate in, and even our solemn responsibility to steward, but it is not ours to control. For all of our science, our technology, our air-conditioned buildings, our chemically enhanced soils, our genetically modified foods, our dams, our weapons, our internet, and even our artificial intelligence cannot change that. Over the years, I've learned that one of the best ways to remind myself of my limitations is to follow the examples of my ancestors. To rise in the morning, walk or run towards the east, and greet the sunrise with my prayers. That is one of my favorite pieces in this entire book. and it's in the introduction, but it's there because it's not about the doctrine of discovery. It's not about the history. It's not, but it's a practice, a discipline modeled by my ancestors for generations, hundreds of years. And it wasn't even passed down to me. My grandfather was a boarding school survivor. I didn't go out to watch the sunrise with him. I didn't see that being passed down to me. It's something I knew that our people did, but I didn't incorporate it in my life until we moved to the reservation. I didn't have a mentor who was taking me out every morning and walking me through the process, showing me the prayers that are helping me to understand what this was all about. It's something I knew my people had done, and it's something I began incorporating into my life. And so the things I learned and experienced were things came from watching and allowing this experience to happen in front of me. And it was life-changing. I started out doing that, and over the years, I did it for 11 years, and I would take a picture every morning and post it on my social media for the last maybe 7 or 8 years. And people would appreciate my photos. They liked them. I got a group of people who were constantly commenting on them and sharing them. And then I moved from the reservation to DC, and we lived in this concrete jungle. And there was no easy way to find the sunrise. There was nowhere within walking distance I could go where I could easily see the sunrise. And I didn't know where to go even to drive. And so I didn't do it nearly as frequently. I still traveled a lot, so I would see sunrises when I traveled, but I wasn't doing it as a spiritual discipline. And 1 year turned into 2, and 2 years turned into 3, and I wasn't watching the sunrise on a regular basis. And then I ran for president, and I was completely sucked into the political realm of things, which is all about power and about control and about maintaining control. And after the campaign was over, I realized I needed to get into a better place spiritually. And I think it was in January or February of this year where I just said to myself, I have to go back to watching the sunrise. I have to reclaim this discipline. I can't live in this concrete jungle. I can't survive in the world of politics if I don't have this discipline reminding me daily I'm not in control. And so I began the process of I found the place. It's about a 20-minute drive from my house. If you watch my sunrises, I live stream them now, and they come up over the Potomac River, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's near the airport, and so you hear the planes in the background, but on some mornings, it's completely still and silent. This morning was amazing because the water was completely still. My technology wasn't working, and I don't have a live stream of it. I did record it, but the sound wasn't working on my phone, so there's no volume. But the water was like glass almost on the river. And it was so quiet until the plane started flying over. But it was so quiet when I first arrived there. And it was beautiful. And one of the things that I'm doing right now, and one of the reasons we included this at the beginning in the intro of the book, is because this spiritual discipline is actually what shaped me and gave me the ability to observe the things that I was observing and to speak the truth that I was speaking and to confront the overwhelming oppressions and injustices that we were observing and learning about and experiencing. Right? The doctrine of discovery is so systemic. It's so institutionalized. It has such a long history. And it when you look at how deeply embedded it is within the church and our U.S. society and the Western world, it becomes overwhelming. How is this ever going to change? How are we ever going to fix this? How are we ever going to change this? And it's the discipline of watching the sunrise, of understanding it's not about my power. It's not about being in control. It's learning how to feel at peace, even knowing you're out of control, and of understanding there is an order and a plan. Creator's doing something. We're a part of the production. We're not orchestrating. And that's the type of thing that gave me hope when I was back on the reservation for 11 years, to look more closely at this doctrine of discovery. And it was during those 5 years, the first 5 years here in DC, when I wasn't watching the sunrise, that I began to lose kind of touch with that. And I began feeling more overwhelmed and more frustrated and more hopeless about things that are ever going to change. And so what I'm doing now, not only do we include this in the book to hopefully draw people into this discipline, but I'm watching the sunrise and I'm live streaming it, inviting people, giving people a chance to step into this practice with me. I want to help build a nation where we the people means all the people. I want to get the church out of bed with empire. I want to decolonize Western Christianity and my own country. Those tasks seem overwhelming. And so, and for people to join me, the tendency when people want to join this work is they want to address it through power. They want to address it through, well, let's just raise more money and have more control, and we'll take this thing back. It's like, that's not going to do it. And so I'm raising up partners in our book by telling them, describing to them the sunrise. And now I'm doing it almost as a step of modeling or even discipleship of letting people join me virtually by sitting on this riverbank virtually and watching the sunrise 3 to 5 mornings a week. It rains here a lot more frequently than back in the desert, and so you don't see the sunrise every day like we used to. Out there, probably 6 days a week, I could see the sunrise, and I could see it right outside my front door. I didn't have to walk very far. Here I have to drive 20 minutes, and we get rain weekly. So there's at least 2 or 3 mornings a week where you can't see the sunrise because of the clouds. So this is what I'm doing, but this is why we included it in the introduction of the book, is because if we don't have this type of understanding, we're never going to be able to address the deeply systemic problems that we're facing that come up out of the book. The next part of the introduction that we talk about here, after we have this section on the sunrise, is we introduce a bit of a need for lament. And this is how Sung-chan and I first kind of connected in the first place. He was finishing his book, Prophetic Lament, and I was talking about the doctrine of discovery. I was speaking to Christian audiences and calling the church to lament. And Sung-chan was out promoting his book and talking about prophetic lament, and not only teaching people how to lament, but even rebuking the church for not being able to lament. And we were at so many conferences together, separately, but together, like we were speaking on the same stages, but we weren't teamed up or anything, that we heard each other over and over and over again, and we became friends, and we got to know each other's message and realized we had some very similar themes. And as we continued to grow in our friendship and to do work with other organizations together, we finally decided to write this book together and to put it out. And so both of us were talking about lament, and Sung-chan has done a lot to teach me about lament. I highly recommend his book, The Prophetic Lament. I highly recommend reading it and seeing that discipline of lament, not only drawn out of the scriptures, but described and invited into this process of lament. And we're convinced that lament is a key component that is going to be needed to engage in the dialogue and in deconstructing the doctrine of discovery. So lament is a very, very, very important component of what we're trying to do. The last section is our purpose and direction of the text. And I want to read 1 or 2 paragraphs from this section just to let you know what we're trying to do with this. This is on page 9. And we say, this text offers the hope that healing can occur when unsettling truths are confronted. For centuries, we have kept hidden the stories of the oppressed people in our society. We have embraced the stories of success and exceptionalism rather than engaging the narrative of suffering and oppression. This obsession with self-evaluation, with self-elevation of the American church and American society reflects an absence of truth-telling. The American church has yielded the prophetic voice because it has not spoken in historically and theological truth. And then we go through what we want to do in each chapter. We say in chapter 1, we introduce the doctrine of discovery and how it was formed in the theological imagination of Western imperial culture. In chapter 2, we examine how sinful social systems and structures are fueled by mediating narratives and shaped by the social and theological imagination. In chapter 3, we examine the difference between the godly authority exercised by Jesus versus the supposed greatness of worldly power. Chapter 4 offers an overview of the rise of Christendom and its defense of the church. In chapter 5, we will explore how the doctrine of discovery intersects with the myth of Anglo-Saxon superiority, informing a dysfunctional imagination that influenced American history. Chapter 6 traces how the founding documents of the United States are shaped by the narrative of white Christian exceptionalism. In chapter 7, we discuss how the legal system codified this dysfunctional imagination of white supremacy and the discovery doctrine. Chapter 8 continues the story of the brutal mistreatment and genocide of Native communities and the legal precedent that allowed this brutality. Chapters 9 and 10 examine how the absence of Christ within the heresy of Christendom led to the creation of a mythological white messiah by the name of Abraham Lincoln. We will discuss how the dysfunctional narrative of white supremacy was not so easily shirked even by the great emancipator. In chapter 11, we explore how this dysfunctional narrative that has held a centuries-long grip on the American imagination has resulted in the trauma of white America, both within and outside the church. Chapter 12 reveals how this trauma has hindered the work of racial conciliation. Our book concludes with a call for conciliation with a new focus and emphasis in that this is necessary in order to deal with the deeply rooted dysfunction in our society. Because the more familiar term racial reconciliation implies a pre-existing harmony and unity, we propose the use of the term racial conciliation. And then we talk about how that conciliation is going to be possible through truth-telling and the creation of a common memory. That's the outline for our book. This is what we wanted to do. This is what we set out to work through. And the introduction is the invitation into this dialogue. We also include a warning, as I do when I speak, that this is going to be hard. We're not going to hold back. We're not going to make things easy or light. This is going to be a difficult book to read. But if you stay engaged, if you walk through this entire process with us, we'll get to a better place. But we have to deal with some deeply unsettling truth along the way in order to get there. So I want to invite you with me into this journey. I want to invite you into this process of going through this book, chapter by chapter. My goal is to do it every Friday, hopefully around this time, although we may look if there's better times when people are more available and we get a better audience on our live streams. But we're going to live stream it. It goes out on both my Facebook page as well as my YouTube channel. And then we are also going to, will be archived on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook page. And I'll also upload it to my Instagram television, Wireless Hogan on my Instagram channel. And so this will give people a week to engage with it. If you are interested in joining this study and you don't have a copy of the book, you can definitely order a copy from my website, which is wirelesshogan.com, and you can get a signed copy of it. There's also an audio version available through Audible. There is an e-version available through Amazon, and you can buy it in pretty much most bookstores. If your bookstore doesn't have it locally, they can order it for you. You can also get it online through Amazon and other places like that, or signed copies through my website. So I invite you into this journey. I'm looking forward to spending the next 2.5 months kind of walking through this book. Next week, we'll be discussing chapter 1. I encourage you, if you have a copy of the book, to read chapter 1 before we get to that discussion. If you have questions throughout the week, go ahead and submit them to me. There's 2 ways. Eventually, I'm going to get a page up on my website where we can engage some of this better. But for the moment, I'm going to give you an email address where you can email questions to, and you can email questions. You can send it to book@wirelesshogan.com, or if you want to hashtag it on Twitter or other social media, I will check this hashtag a few times a week. And if there's questions there, it's Unselling Truth QA. And so if you want to use that hashtag, you can use that to put questions online. And you can send those in. Eventually, I hope to get either a group created or a page set up where we can go through this a little bit better and have even a more effective way to submit questions. But if you have questions for next week, either about the introduction or about chapter 1, I encourage you to send those in to me, and I'll take some time to answer those, and we'll go through the chapter next week, kind of talking a bit more in depth about some of the sections and answering any questions that may be coming up about that chapter. So that's it. That's what I'm hoping to do. I definitely invite you along in this journey. I thank you for joining me today. Hopefully we'll keep this around 45 minutes each week. I don't want to go real long, but this is what I want to do. If there's anyone online right now that has any questions that you want to just submit in the chat, I can see the chat scrolling through on my screen. So if you have any questions that you want to submit right now, you can send those in. I wasn't following the chat as much throughout the stream, so I'm not sure if you said anything earlier. Let me look through what we have. I don't see any questions submitted. Yeah, I don't see anything here, but if you have any questions you'd like to submit, feel free to do that. Yeah, next week I'll jump online in the afternoon. I'll try to put a schedule up throughout the week on my social media and get it announced exactly what time we'll be doing it, and we'll be sharing that out throughout the week. Other than that, Unselling Truth, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. You can order signed copies from my website, which is wirelesshogan.com. And let me put that link again once more in the chat if you'd like to order that. And other than that, thank you, my relatives. I hope you have a great day. Walk in beauty, and then we'll learn how to walk in beauty together. And hook on it.